what are they doing? They're sitting around a table and they're telling stories. The same story year after year. In early March, our church school children learned about the Passover. And they did that by having their own Seder and talking about the stories. A couple weeks later, St. Patrick's Day began to roll around, and one of our 8-year-olds was particularly excited about St. Patrick's Day. And the day before, said to his dad as they were driving along, "Daddy, do we need to rub sheep's blood on our door so the leprechaun doesn't kill the firstborn in our house?" It makes perfect sense to me, actually. Because as a society, we are trying to draw on all kinds of myths and stories and allegories from all different kinds of places to piece together something that makes sense for our complicated and confusing world. We try to make sense of the stories of our faith traditions and how they intersect with our own modern Twitter lives. We're in an in-between time, I think, and things are shifting. We're talking about, in new ways, how we got here and why we're here, and if we are going to have a future, what will that look like? And Christianity is going through a similar kind of shift. In fact, Diana Butler Bass has written a new book called Christianity After Religion: The End of the Church and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening. And she says that rather than focusing on what we believe, i.e. the facts and the doctrines, that we are moving into a time where we're going to focus more on how we believe. That means about purpose and meaning. How we believe rather than what we believe. So when we come to Easter, instead of asking what happened on Easter Day, because we may never understand that, maybe a better question is, how does resurrection happen? Because that brings it into the now, the present moment. Many people say that we are leaving, in Christianity, the age of belief that we've been in for a few centuries, and we are moving into the age of spirit. In fact, I imagine that many of you are already moving into that age, because I would imagine a great percentage of you describe yourself as spiritual, but not religious. Am I right about that? No, I'm not. The current cover of Newsweek has the bold words, "Forget the church, follow Jesus." I like the follow Jesus part. Y'all are a little slow on the uptake. The lead article by Andrew Sullivan, he talks about deinstitutionalizing the church and depoliticizing Christianity to get back to the basics. I think Christianity will look very different in the coming years, but we will never let go of stories, because stories bring us life. We are the stories we tell ourselves. We all want our stories affirmed because we get affirmation that our lives have meaning. The thing is, you and I have our own stories, and they tend to define us. And sometimes we get those stories about our own selves a little mixed up. As a society, we are, I think, overly therapized. While therapy can be very helpful, one of the outcomes as a society is that we as a people have been taught that we are shaped by our wounds. Are you with me now? Still pulling it here, okay. The thing is, we wouldn't have Easter if the Christian story ended with the wounds. They are a part of the story, but the wounds get transformed, and they are no longer the centerpiece. In fact, what a better time than Easter to shift our story and to focus more on the resurrection than the crucifixion, to focus more on the empty tomb than the cross. And instead of having the main narrative embracing life. Look at the three in the story this morning. Their encounter with life is what changed them, and changed their stories too. Their experience overrode their skepticism. Their heart trumped their reason. Enshrouded by the darkness of the early morn and her despairing grief, Mary encounters the tomb. She encounters a new chapter to the story she thought could only end one way. She runs to get Peter and the other disciples because she needs a witness to her experience. And they too begin to run to the garden where life ever flourishes. The two disciples end up in a foot race, Peter and the other disciples. Peter runs ahead and he runs right into the tomb. Remember a few weeks ago how Peter was bold enough to get out of the boat and walk on the water to Jesus? But just 2 days before this, he had spent all his energy running away from everything that was going on, driven by his fear, his denial, and his weakness. But he changes his story in this moment and runs into the empty tomb, and there he is met by a presence that he will now know from within. And the other disciple, the unnamed one, the one that I had always presumed was John, somebody suggested that that other disciple was Lazarus, the one who had been raised from the dead. Makes it more interesting, doesn't it? So Lazarus runs, but when he gets to the tomb, he stops. He doesn't go in. After all, he'd already spent 4 days in a tomb, and that was long enough. But then he has a moment, and something changes him, and he too steps into that open tomb, the place of his pain and darkness, and he is transformed as he meets the presence of life. And Mary Magdalene, she stays, she's still weeping. And her story only begins to change when she hears her name. And in that instant, everything changes. She who thought herself unredeemable and unworthy, in that moment of transformation realizes that she is of great value. And when she goes to hang on to her beloved teacher, he gently resists and says, "Don't hang on to me," as if to say, "Mary, don't be in the past. Things have changed. You need to experience now your own resurrection." Like Peter, Lazarus, and Mary, we need to rewrite some of our stories. And we do that when we encounter resurrection. And when we rewrite our stories, we become fully alive. So I invite you for a moment to think of some of the ways that your stories, your own stories, define you. Think about how you describe yourself to yourself. Let me give you a few clues. A clue would be, well, that's just how I am. Or, I'm becoming my mother. Let's just say it's better if you say that yourself than if your partner says it. Oh wow, who just said that? Me or my father? These are good insights and awarenesses, but if we stay in those places, it keeps us in those stories that sometimes don't serve us. Or if we find ourselves saying, "I'm like this because such and such happened to me." Or someone told me. It's time to write a new story, a new chapter, time to transform the wounds and not have them be the centerpiece of our story. Think of something in your own life right now where you need to turn the page, a blank page, and not be tied to an outcome. The empty tomb is a blank page, a wholly unexpected ending to a story. And that blank page in your life is your empty tomb. The power of resurrection spirit allows you to write something new, something possible you have not accessed before that is already there. I'm not asking you to do anything that I haven't done myself. In fact, yesterday, I turned a page and wrote a new story in my own life. And it happened because on Thursday evening, as we commemorate Holy Thursday, and our leaders shared from their own hearts and experience, Austin Maynard Clark was talking about betrayal and about the losses in her own life and how she felt that in some small ways that she had betrayed the people that she loved. And I couldn't even fully take it in that night. But yesterday, in a moment of solitude, I was able to realize how much I had betrayed and denied my own father. Because my story all along had been that he betrayed and denied me. But you know what? It takes two. And toward the end of his life, yeah, it wasn't pretty the last number of years. But I denied him an opportunity for a second chance. I denied him my affection and my presence, and oh yeah, I showed up now and then in some obligatory way. But I denied him just as much as he denied me. And when I was able to rewrite that story, I could feel something lift, and a sense of being more fully alive. Your story of resurrection, if you were to draw it, what would it look like? If you were to sing it, what would the melody be? If you were to dance it, what would the beat be? But we're not quite done, because resurrection is not a one-time event. It's something we must practice. We must make a habit of embracing life fully, of being willing for the outcome to be different, of imagining possibilities. And when you open yourself to an encounter with the living Christ, with that holy presence, with that holy possibility, something happens, and your story begins to change. We practice resurrection by facing whatever is going on in our life and walking right through it to the other side. Isn't that the resurrection story? The power of resurrection doesn't mean that you won't face hardship, that you won't go through trials, that you won't struggle. But it means that that is not the end of the story. I'm telling you what, I know something about practicing resurrection. For 12 years, I preached in a church that lost people nearly every single week. And for a number of those years, I had to stand up every week after we announced that 3 or 4 people in our congregation died due to HIV/AIDS, and talk about the hope of resurrection and the power of life. And I practiced it long enough that I actually believed it. Now would be a good time for somebody to say something. Amen. We practice resurrection by our willingness to evolve. After all, what's the alternative? The medical definition of death is the cessation of change. We practice resurrection when we rise above our circumstances and we seize the day and we squeeze the juice out of life at every turn that we can. I've been so compelled watching Aung San Suu Kyi, the pro-dissident, the pro-democracy dissident, the country formerly called Burma, as she went from a nonviolent revolutionary to a member of parliament. After being under house arrest for decades, after being maligned by the media there, she has turned a page in what that country, I'm sure, never thought was possible. Our world is trying to give birth to a new story, whether it's the Arab Spring or the American Autumn. The protesters and occupiers, agree with them or not, They are calling out and crying out for resurrection, for a new story, saying there are too many paths that lead to death. We need a path that leads to life. And in this country, we need a new story about immigration. Amen. Now, we may not agree. I'm sure we won't. That's okay. But we can agree that we need new ways to talk about it. And that would be practicing resurrection. Because practicing resurrection doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in community. Look what happened to the community and friends of Jesus. They became the early church and they turned the world upside down. The world is waiting for people to be so full of life and courage and bravery that something begins to shift. Because if your eyes are open, you know, and I know, we can't continue on the path that we are on. Amen. Or we will not have a sustainable, livable, vibrant world for these children that fill these stairs today. So whoever you are today, whether you are Peter, who too long has been running in the opposite direction from an encounter with life, resurrection is for you. Whether you are Lazarus, who needs to walk into that place of pain and darkness, only to find life and healing and not be defined by your wounds, resurrection is for you. Or if you're Mary Magdalene and you simply need to hear somebody call your name so that you know